The Zone Coverage Podcast Network.
Wolves Wired, back in Minneapolis, back in the studio. Tim Faklis and Dane Moore are back with David Naylor and Tom Schreier. The band is back together. The boys are back in town. Sorry.
Wow, that was great.
Maybe I'm still...
Did you just, cross your streams a little bit there?
Yeah, that was for Patrick Fenelon.
Kind of, though. Not all the way.
Just a little bit. I didn't have the soundbite like the other time.
Anyway, I get to say this because I wasn't here last week. They made the playoffs.
Yeah. Oh, my God.
They did it.
Yes. They're here.
They did it.
We have an umbrella to prove it.
Yeah.
Yes, I got an umbrella
and a t-shirt.
today.
And a t-shirt.
And a t-shirt.
That says playoffs on it. One of the most surreal things to me that isn't even specific, it's kind of fringe Timberwolves related. It was after Jazz Thunder Game 2, the Jazz's podium, Ricky Rubio in front of the giant playoffs background thing that they do for the podium was very surreal to look at.
Yeah, we were, as people listening should know, Dane and I were in Houston, and just being physically in front of that podium, not the same one, but the one in Houston that had the playoffs banner. It was very surreal. So yeah, David or Tom, do either of you have any thoughts on just, I guess, the Wolves? We'll talk about Game 2 because we haven't potted since Game 2. The Wolves got smoked, but do you guys have any thoughts on, or David in particular, on just the Wolves making it in general?
I know you guys hit this a lot on last Thursday, which would be 2 pods ago now, I guess, but the Wednesday game was awesome. That was a great...
The game against Denver.
The Denver game was a great game of basketball. It wasn't the highest quality game of basketball, but it was one of the most fun games of any team I've watched all year. And they won it, and it was awesome, and it was a great home crowd. And that, thinking back about that makes me really freaking excited for Saturday night, no matter how badly they got beat in Game 2. I think that Target Center is going to be awesome for at least the first 5 minutes of the game until they're down 20-5. But it's just one of those things that it's good to see. It's good to see that. It's good to see positive forward moving momentum, even as we look smaller picture, as we're going to spend a lot of time doing at Game 2. It's reassuring. Almost more than anything else.
I'm going to preempt what I'm going to say with a wah, wah, wah.
Yeah.
Because I'm going to say something negative, that this was part of the reality of making the playoffs. Making the playoffs in and of itself, in my opinion, was not a win. Coming out, and Tom, am I allowed to swear on here still?
Go ahead, I guess.
Oh, he said that was so much fun.
Okay.
Well, last person I saw just said you can swear occasionally. Swore a lot afterwards.
They come out and crap the bed as they did in Game 2.
Whoa, language.
And if they do that, and if we have, I would say even 1 or 2 more of the games, and if it ends up being a sweep or even a 5-game series, but the emotion that leaves that game and the production that leaves that game and where we're sitting is they shouldn't have made the playoffs. And I know that's not maybe in a popular opinion. Yes, it's been 14 years and it's fun and it's cool to see some guys up at the podium. But this, in my opinion, thus far has been a step backwards. We're seeing a team that is not ready to play in the playoffs, a coach that is not ready to adjust to playoff basketball, and they're getting their ass kicked. And I don't know. I don't think... I thought Game 1 was fun because it was close, but the Rockets weren't playing well. That was pretty clear to me. Yes. And then they come out and get worked in Game 2. And there wasn't will, there wasn't anything that made me feel good about this. And what I said from the beginning is I thought the line to draw was get the 6th seed or don't make the playoffs, because this team, in my opinion, and it's being exposed in this series, has serious roster issues that make it impossible for it to compete in the playoffs. They can't. And having 2 first-round picks could have done something to get this team towards a level where they actually compete. I'm sitting here after 2 games thinking this team is is ready to get onto a treadmill of mediocrity, because I don't know that as the roster is currently constructed that it can get any better.
I don't think it's bad that they're getting worked like this.
Okay. But they're losing.
Yes, they are. They're getting worked and they're getting embarrassed, and everybody knows it, and it's on a national stage. And if there's if there's a motivation that can light a fire under some of these players, maybe getting worked and swept and embarrassed like this is enough of a thing. Maybe this is a thing to make some changes at the franchise level. Maybe Glenn Taylor's sitting watching the series being like, yo, this sucks. Mm-hmm. It's cool that we're here, but this sucks. And this looks bad. And it looks bad when Karl-Anthony Towns is taking 9 shots a game. Something's wrong with that. Something's wrong systemically with that. And it's like, I don't think that for the long-term future of this franchise, them getting in and getting embarrassed like this is necessarily the worst thing in the world.
Sure. What I would just say to that is, all that, Glenn, that opinion that you just threw out right there, what if they just would have missed the playoffs? They lose game 82 to Denver. Isn't that same thing? The benefits from that would have still happened. They would have said, hey, we still have systemic flaws. This team has enough talent to be a team that can compete in the playoffs, and they're not.
Can you make the case if they make the playoffs that Glenn sees it as, or Tibbs makes the case as, Jimmy Butler missed 20-some games at the end of the year. They were the 3 seed, and then they fell. They make the playoffs, at least you get more time with Jimmy, and then you get worse.
I also think Towns needed this experience. Like, clearly, and I know some of this is systemic, and we've addressed that, but clearly he did not realize that there's regular season here and then playoffs up here. I think for the young guys, the actual experience of playing a team like the Rockets that could compete for a championship is valuable. I'm going to go a different direction than you guys. I think that Denver-Minnesota game, that it got that close that they won, threw everyone way out of whack in terms of their perspective. It was not a good, this was not a successful season unless something completely changes in the next few games here. And
which it could, and then I would be wrong with what I'm saying. I would change what.
And I don't know if I know this is a saying in hockey. I don't know if it's as true in basketball, but they say the series is not over until you have loss on your home court.
D'Antoni and Chris Paul both said that after game 2. And,
if they pull off the game 1 win, that also throws everyone's perspective out of whack. At the end of the day, they had an opportunity to get between 3 and 6, right, between those seeds, and have a winnable first round. And that, to me, would be successful because you can win the first round.
And that's what I agree with that. That's what I was saying, is even getting to 6 seed and being able to fight and claw with a Portland or New Orleans or whatever. I mean, they're just unable to compete with Houston, and mostly that's a testament to Houston. I just don't think I think you get very minimal value from what's going to end up happening in the series, which is a 4 or 5 game shellacking. I don't think there's much value that outweighs having 2 first-round picks and give you the opportunity to go out and completely transform your roster. I think the team is inherently more limited in the way that they can change the team going forward, and also I wonder if another negative externality is that this team is going to kind of got a pass because they did make the playoffs when I don't know if they deserve a pass.
Okay. I think missing the playoffs is even if you think making the playoffs and getting swept by the Houston Rockets is a fail, which I'm not sure I agree with just because of all the circumstances that got them down to the 8th seed. Missing the playoffs after everything that happened, I think, is a far bigger fail. Sure, you get a draft pick, but considering where they started before Jimmy Butler got hurt, and then backing in and then having to play sort of this Game 7-like atmosphere, whatever you want to call it, against Denver, the bad loss is the loss to Memphis and everything else. I think missing the playoffs looks a lot worse and is a lot bigger of a deal than making the playoffs.
Looks a lot worse to who? Who does it look a lot worse to?
I think if you're a fan thinking about purchasing season tickets, I think if you're a fan thinking about even following the team, I just think there's this perception that you're a playoff team.
I think to the players, first of all, I think making the playoffs is they don't care about draft picks or anything. I mean, if you're Jimmy Butler, and I understand that there are even questions about maybe whether extending him or not is worth it or whatever, and we've kind of talked about that in the past. But if you're Jimmy Butler and you're on a team that misses the playoffs, I think that's a far bigger red flag than making the playoffs, getting the 8th seed, and getting smoked by Houston.
And I think that they all agree with you, and it's clear that the players obviously wanted to make the playoffs and are happy they did. What I'm saying is I don't think it's kind of like players playing for a tanking team. They don't really care about what's going on, what's going to happen right now that's going to affect the team 5 years down the road. I don't think Taj Gibson is worried about anything other than what's right in front of him, and that's smart and that's good. I'm talking about for this franchise that this, I don't think that this has been any better than what losing in game 82 would have been. I think there would have been a sting of sadness, and the team is, I mean, basically to me showing that it's one of, if not the worst team in the playoffs. And I just don't think there's very much value in being the 7th or 8th seed in the playoffs.
I have a hypothetical I want to hit because it's a parallel to a thing that I've seen a lot in my timeline on the wider discussion of the playoffs. What if the Wolves were in the Blazers' current position?
Which was close to happening.
Where they'd gone in as the 3 seed and had home court advantage and have gotten worked in the first 3 games of that series.
I love
they have gotten embarrassed, and everything I have seen from Blazers people is that they now have to reconsider the entire direction of their franchise after getting the 3 seed going into the playoffs on a hot streak. And I know, Dane, you were never a big fan of the Blazers as a playoff threat, as a legitimate team, but it's like from a perception standpoint, like, the Blazers, as that 3 seed, look so much worse than the Wolves, who most people expected to lose this series in 4 or 5. Like,
and that's where what I'm reeling back to is like, yeah, I thought they were going to lose it in 4 or 5. I'm saying getting there in the first place, and the first 2 games is playing out as proof that this isn't that valuable. The team is getting worked, and it doesn't matter what seed they were. If they were the 3 seed and they were going to get worked by the 6 seed, I don't think it would have been that valuable either. Playoff experience, in my opinion, is only valuable if you are in a series that you are competing in and a series that you can actually win. Getting whooped in the first round doesn't do anything to. It does a very small amount of building.
So there's a very small amount of value in Towns seeing how much harder it is to play against a Clint Capella type, and even if he's getting murdered. Like, the only real gain that I see from missing the playoffs is getting that draft pick. And to me, I would take Karl-Anthony Towns learning a lesson and getting destroyed in a 4-game series, 5-game series, whatever have you, over a second draft pick. I don't know.
Yeah, I just disagree with that.
No, totally.
We could go over, because I understand where you're going with this, and I think, even though I think it's a good thing for the Wolves to make the playoffs, I do agree that you have to differentiate between getting smoked. And to be fair, that may have happened in the second round, and we may just have this discussion later on. You know what I mean? And it would be nice to have it in the back pocket, be like, hey, the Wolves are maybe the best of kind of the non-Golden State Houstons. Still, not great if you can't get past Houston and Golden State. Set that aside for a second. What is the value of the pick to you? Is it that you can trade Gorgie along with it and open up cap?
It's currency. It's just currency to be able to make moves in the playoffs. Let's wind back to last summer, and we were left underwhelmed with the offseason after Jimmy Butler. And it's like, man, I wish we had a little bit more to go out and have gotten C.J. Miles. Or I wish that we could have, instead of getting Taj Gibson, we were able to get up to getting a Paul Millsap. It's currency in the fact that a first-round pick can, at a minimum, create you $10 to $15 to $20 million of cap space. And that is the ability, gives you the ability to go out and get players that can transform a franchise. And particularly having 2 first-round picks, I think that is very valuable. And I think the majority of people out there, and even people who cover teams, don't understand that's how it works. This is, if we're into the summer and Kemba Walker gets traded, and you're like, wow, I wish the Wolves would have got in on that. The Wolves could have got in on that if they had another first-round draft pick. So, yes, I mean, I don't want to dwell on this too much, because there is value in playing this series, and we're learning things about this team. But you want to throw a whole other thing upon this is Houston has now put together a blueprint for stopping Karl-Anthony Towns. If I'm teams going forward next year, this is how I defend the Timberwolves. If they have the same roster next year, I defend the Timberwolves this way every single time. Switch every single pick and roll and leave themselves open to be punished on the weak side by three-point shooting, because nobody in the Timberwolves is a three-point shooter. So double Towns, shade back there. That's not something that they've seen a lot of this year. And Karl Towns is stoppable.
Not everybody has PJ Tucker to switch on to Karl-Anthony Towns.
It hasn't been
when they
PJ Tucker all the time. It's a ton of different guys.
The Rockets are a much better defensive team than the league. I'm just saying,
but other teams haven't done this. We haven't seen other teams do this.
Let me bring up two articles you've written. The first one, you suggested that you showed Teague throw the ball into Towns, and most teams would send Teague into the lane in order to keep Towns from being double teamed, essentially, right?
Yes, they just let Towns post up.
Yeah, and on the flip side, most recently, you wrote kind of on this contradiction between Teague, who thinks that Towns should be down low, posting up, and kind of the team dynamic of. I thought this was really interesting. They're having Gibson post up because he doesn't have the 3-point skill. I guess bigger picture here is I think there is kind of an expiration date on Gibson, just realistically, and that's not taking away from him as a player, just looking at his age, right? And it seems like Towns actually would be an inside-out player optimally, right? That he would
if he was
start
playing
outside.
with a stretch four more often.
Also on a roster that he's not the best 3-point shooter, which he probably is.
Absolutely
so how
is.
does he become? How do you change that roster? Wiggins has to shoot threes, right? You have to go out and get guys, right?
How do you
and
do that?
Need cap
How do you go
space.
out and get guys?
You
and
have
get cap
to.
space?
You have to trade Gorgie in order. And
how do you trade Gorgie?
You're saying
probably a first-round draft.
Now you have one, or the Wolves have one that they can trade. Do you advocate trading that, or is the reason why you want two because you want to keep one and trade one?
No, I want to trade both of them. I think that
with Tibbs,
the time is now.
I know they're old.
would Tibbs
like
trade
they
two
are.
if he had to? I don't think he would. I don't know.
Why?
Because like trading 2 first-round picks and. It indicates to me that either you're trading Gorgie for cap space or you're trading Gorgie for a guy that already probably makes some money that you would require 2 first-round picks to get.
But does
right?
Tibbs use rookies? I mean, I think very much they're going to use all their assets to rejigger this roster to compete next year.
Sure. I mean,
I don't see any chance that they draft another rookie.
I mean, I just don't. I don't think
with one pick, I don't know. I think with 2, I could see him drafting a guy. I think it's harder to, unless you are throwing 2 first-rounders with Gorgie's contract to just totally dump him. I don't know. I don't see too many scenarios where.
What is the kind of player?
I would need to know what kind of player he's going for.
But that's the thing is we can't know that right now.
Right.
What we can know, and there's evidence of years and years of every offseason, the players that are able to be had through trades, and you need to have assets to trade for them, and the Timberwolves don't have assets to make trades. And in my opinion, this team is nowhere near at a competing in the playoffs.
Definitely not. No, I agree with that. We might just value first-round picks a little differently. But
the other question is, I don't think this is an off-season move right now, and I know that's our focus, but does someone make an offer, a competitive offer for Wiggins that involves 3-point shooter?
What's Andrew Wiggins' trade value?
I know that's weird
my
thing,
question.
but that does open up.
It's a very
cap.
interesting question because he's a big cap hold starting next year.
Yeah, I think.
I don't think this.
I think there's one team that's dumb enough out there to see him as a positive asset.
San Antonio Spurs. No.
But I think let's get into that.
We're going to have a long time to talk about that.
How about we back all the way up?
I was just wanting to say that have been disappointed in these first 2 games, and coming into the series, part of my fear is. Man, I'm excited this team's in the playoffs. I'm excited to watch playoff basketball. I don't know if it's good for this team to just go out and get swept in 4 games.
I think the core of the discussion that we've had for the last however many minutes it's been is on the court value versus like emotional, psychological value to fan base, team, players, owner, whatever.
Yeah.
And those 2 things will never truly see eye to eye. And that's part of the weird and cool stuff that is sports.
Absolutely.
You and I are never going to see eye to eye on this, and that's fine because we're going to have different takes, as is everybody else. That's because I don't think about.
We're not stopping this pod till we all agree on one thing.
Well, because I don't think about the value of draft picks hardly nearly as much as I should. And I understand that. People talked a little bit in the last week of the season about the doomsday scenario of the Thunder getting that 9 seed and missing the playoffs entirely, and the Wolves getting no picks.
That would have been hilarious.
I thought that was hilarious. You would have just torn your laptop into pieces.
Let me go this direction. I think the Wolves' immediate goal is to become relevant again. And what I mean by that is I know people are talking about, I know the new logos all over town or whatever, but have a legit, sort of.
No, I know.
I mean, you see it.
Yeah. I got an umbrella right here.
Yeah.
The umbrella is this podcast.
Yeah, hopefully it'll rain. That's really the hope of that. But no, it's having a legit season ticket holder base so that you can actually fill the arena on just normal game days, that it doesn't have to be a big opponent coming into town. It's that, you do see like that people really believe that this team can win, and then shifting the conversation to what is kind of the how long can Houston and Golden State keep this up, and can the Wolves be next, if you will? I mean, I really think that's where they are, and I think it's really hard to do that if you miss the playoffs. It's also hard to do that if you come home after one game you could have stolen and you had a big missed opportunity there, a second game where you looked like they didn't belong in that court. If you come home and play well in those two games, I think it goes a long way to selling this idea that, look, the Wolves are going in the right direction.
See, the way I see it is those two things are binary, different. The fan base building all that up, I don't really get that. I don't spend that much time thinking about that. What I do think about is, you said being next, the next one to come up and compete with the Houstons and the Golden States. And what I think is they take a lifting weights analogy. You can't just, you say, I want to be able to lift 300 pounds of weight. Like, probably you definitely can't just decide to go lift 300 pounds of weight tomorrow.
Don't try it.
Don't do it.
Do it.
Do not.
Right now. I'm going.
Hold him down.
But if you take 6 months to work out really hard, maybe over in 2 years from now you'll be able to bench press 300 pounds. And I guess my view on this Timberwolves team has been the amount of physical building that they need to do to be able to compete with those teams, I think, is very, very far from where they stand right now. And that isn't even, I'm not even really trying to rip on the Wolves. It's just that's how good these teams are at the top of the conference, the top of the league. And they need to do a lot of things to build in the meantime. So can't we kind of build up the fan base and get like somewhat excited? You got a new logo, you're winning a little bit more, but realize that this is a ways down the road.
I really don't think missing the playoffs would have gotten the fans there. Like, I think
the fans already hate the team because Tibbs is
the diehards really hate the team, but making the playoffs, I think, will keep the casual fan more intrigued.
I think this is also,
how important do we know that is? How are we sure it's that important?
Let me use an example, and then do you want to go? Tim?
No, go ahead.
My one hockey reference I'll make in this.
This is your second one.
I just made a weightlifter.
Sorry.
So you feel free. I've
been trying not
David,
to make it. I've been
David,
trying
let's figure
not
out
to
a
make
soccer one.
I already have one. I've been trying not to say it.
We'll let you drop it. The Wild regularly get 19,000 people in their building, and it's because the team tends to win at home, doesn't win on the road. But the standard for like passion for that team is pretty low. Like the Wolves, they're going to go out in the first round. They likely will go out in 5 games tonight, right? It's not as this team has always been behind a Chicago, Blackhawks, or now the Winnipeg Jets, or behind somebody. And there's no real rational thought. Like, they'd have to get lucky to get into the Western Conference Finals or into the finals. Like, they've never been a championship caliber team. Mm-hmm. So I don't think it takes that much to be relevant here and to have a robust fan base, right? And maybe I'm talking as just a basketball person, someone who did see the Marbury Garnett Wolves, like someone who remembers when the Wolves were like a thing, right? And I agree. I think that's a byproduct of winning, of being next. Where I guess maybe I differentiate with you is I don't think they're that far. They're far from Houston and Golden State, but how far off are they from Portland, from Utah, from...
They're already... I think you can make the case that the 3 through 9 are already kind of their own thing.
Can they differentiate themselves in this offseason? I think that's a huge
From that
question.
group?
Yes.
No.
It'd be tough. It'd be really tough.
Those teams are going to improve too.
Right.
What is
it? Would take. I think it would take Wiggins and Towns to take another, in particular Wiggins, because I think Towns is kind of doing a steady thing. It's got to be Wiggins making another step, or
getting moved.
I mean, to Dane, to your credit, like if had they missed the playoffs, they would have had the flexibility to maybe dump some people and make some new moves. But I think it really everything stops with Wiggins and with Towns. Wiggins in particular, and his. I don't want to call it like stunted development, but whatever you want to call it.
Doesn't Wiggins literally have to hit threes and free throws? Play, I guess, defense is a big part.
Well, and this can maybe transitioned into the series, I've really liked what I've seen from Andrew Wiggins.
Yes.
in the
I think
two
he's
games.
been the best player in the series for the Wolves. I think
There it goes. Game on.
I think you can honestly make the case that in terms of two-way basketball, and this is great. We're talking about the series now. Andrew Wiggins has been the best player, and a lot of his scoring production has come in the first quarters, and the last 2 games, that's been the Wolves' most successful period of the game.
Which, ironically,
Well, I guess game 1, the Rockets got out to a big lead, and then the bench came in. I should fix that. But overall, I think Wiggins has played pretty solid defense, and I think he's making more of the correct decisions offensively than he did towards the end of the regular season, which, if we're really going micro on Wiggins, that's a good sign.
The thing that feels weird about Wiggins and hot first halves is I feel like that was a huge thing in his first and second year, is that he would score a lot in the first halves of games and then go silent in second halves. Like he'd have 20, 22, 24 points at halftime and then finish the game with like 29. Like that is a feeling, and I'm not looking at stats for that. But that reminds me of really bad Timberwolves teams with Andrew Wiggins leading the scoring.
Well, and I think we kind of saw some of that in games 1 and 2 is he was playing really well till he hit foul trouble.
Yep.
And I think a theme, then we often talk about the Andrew Wiggins disappearing acts that happen from time to time, and it's when he hits the bench and he struggles to take that mentality that he had, that he was having success with before he went to the bench, that active Wiggins, whatever you want to call it, and then he comes back out and his instant reaction then is to kind of be passive again. And I think when we talk about the big step for Wiggins is it's when we start seeing Andrew leave games and come back in as if he never left. I think that it will be the step towards him taking that next step to being a borderline all-star level player. I know we want to talk about the free throw percentages.
No.
Percentages,
I want to piggyback off your thought real quick. Do you think that they have defined roles? Because I think the issue is Wiggins also doesn't want to be like a gravity suck where all of a sudden Butler and Towns are like, well, what the hell, man? You know?
Yeah. Let's phrase that differently.
So my point is, I think, so like, I'm going to use a ridiculous example, but Shabazz Muhammad would come off the bench, like dribble into traffic, and you could tell he's trying to make something happen. It's just nothing would happen. And you'd be like, on that play, it would have been smarter to go to Towns or Butler. How does he become an assertive player off the bench without taking away from Towns and Butler?
I think that's an adjustment. I mean, I think it's hard, particularly when you're playing in a team with 4 or 5 other gravity sucks.
I love my word that I just made up.
But they do. I mean, it's kind of hard. It's kind of hard for Andrew Wiggins. We can, be upset about his proclivity to take a fadeaway mid-range shots and stuff. But at his core, he is and will always be an isolation player. And a player who, is looking to attack the basket in that way.
And one who's pretty gifted at that.
Absolutely. And it's kind of hard to coexist, I think, in an offense that has 4 or 5 other guys who are also that. So I think given some of the inherent difficulty there, rather, there has been some inherent difficulty in playing alongside a Jamal Crawford, a Jimmy Butler, a Derrick Rose, a Karl Towns. You're not in even Teague too. Yeah. You're not in a freewheeling type of offense. I think Andrew Wiggins would benefit a lot from a more egalitarian offense that swings, hits Wiggins. He can attack one-on-one off the move. But I don't know if that's ever going to be it. So, given this current roster construct, the things he can do is become a 40% free throw shooter and an 40% 40% 3-point shooter and an 80% free throw shooter.
Oh, I hope he doesn't become a 40% free throw shooter. That would be
only
really bad.
Only in the fourth quarters
except for that Wednesday game.
You're exactly right.
Yeah, I agree completely. I think Wiggins. I think people were hoping when Jimmy Butler came here that he was going to benefit from having a lesser defender on him. But as it stands right now, his role's changed, but the way that he tries to score hasn't really.
How would you say his role's changed?
Well, just in that he's not necessarily the first guy that Tibbs will go to at the end of a game. He's not the first option. Different guys have the ball a lot of the time. Last year, I mean, it didn't happen a ton, but there were more pick and rolls with Wiggins and Towns. And over Cat a lot of the time at the end of games last year, Wiggins was the guy that they went to. So maybe Wiggins is more apt to go and try to find his own shot as a result of all that. Just got more guys dribbling the ball. More guys, as you said, are gravity sucks, so to speak.
Episode 140, gravity suck.
So, I mean, part of it might be...
This is Tom trying to find an alternate phrase for black hole, which we called Shabazz Muhammad for a very long time.
Yes, you're right. Sorry. I'm not a scientist.
I like
sir.
gravity suck better, I think. I think
I'm not a scientist.
part of it could be coaching. I mean, I don't know what the answer is. I kind of like the free flowing offense idea, but I mean, overall, the way that he attacks and tries to score is so similar to what it's been his whole career, and it's never been an efficient brand of offense, or not consistently anyway.
And that was the point that I wanted to hit on this discussion is like, it seems like we have a relatively good idea of what all of these individual players are good at. And, as we've said before, it doesn't seem like the offense as currently constructed is built to maximize the talents of those players.
Yeah, square peg, round hole.
Yeah, and that's
coaching.
It's not saying that Tom Thibodeau is a bad coach. It's saying that this might not be the best fit in terms of the players that are out there, in terms of maybe this needs something more creative. Maybe this needs a different solution. It's not as extreme as like the Knicks trying to play the triangle no matter who their personnel is, right? It's not a triangular peg into a round hole.
What an era
to go there. But like it's
an ice cube.
It feels like kind of that same thing where it's like it seems like all of these individual pieces, we see the moments that they are good, we see the things that they are best at, but they just don't happen that often or in the same games.
Even Jimmy Butler. Jimmy Butler is essentially taken the I don't want to call it the Wiggins role from last year, but he's the guy at the end of games, and they don't even necessarily use Jimmy in a way that is always fitting. Like at the end, he attacks in a way off the dribble that isn't really. He's not that great at it. Or even at the end of games, at the end of game 1, that final shot, or at the end of game 82. That final shot in regulation, there's something missing there. I don't really know what it is.
I want to address the end of the game situation because I think this is an interesting case study for the roles the players have and what they're going to do with their 3 stars going forward. In my mind, I think Butler should have the ball in his hands, try to make something happen, kick it to Wiggins if you need a score right away, or Towns ideally for a more efficient, easier shot, right?
Yep.
And I think Wiggins' mentality should literally be, again, he'd have to be a better three-point shooter. I can knock down this shot, or if they overplay the shot, I'm just going to get to the basket and score a drought foul.
Well, like in the game 1 situation where they're down 3, right? Like when Jimmy's got that ball, Andrew Wiggins' thing, in my opinion, should be use the fact that you're probably faster than whoever's guarding you to get open on the perimeter. We know he can hit the shot. We've seen him hit the shot. His percentage isn't the greatest, but if he gets himself open and has a set shot from 3 and is delivered the ball to that, I think that's better than Jimmy running straight into 2 people everybody knows he's going to do.
I completely agree.
Including the defense.
Yeah.
And if you overplay Wiggins and Butler, then you should have Towns open, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, it just seems like that should not be that hard.
Not to mention the fact that they typically do have Teague Crawford on in those situations, who aren't exactly shabby shooters themselves.
I mean,
if open,
Crawford would be so entertaining. I don't know if it works, but he'd take a weird shot from somewhere out of nowhere.
They've done it before, and it works sometimes because that's what Jamal does.
Yeah,
but it's like, or in a different world, you have Bielitsa on as like a better 3-point shooting option.
Yeah.
So Butler's 0 for 12 in those situations.
Yep.
This season, it's kind of hard to, and this has always been a thing. Remember going back to Kobe and like Carmelo, and it was like, well, are they actually, like, you see some of their, like, oh, Carmelo's 12%.
What is clutch, really?
Yeah, and there's a lot of that, but just because there aren't that many opportunities to take the last shot of the game, it's hard to have a robust sample size. So what we do have is late shot clock situations are probably the most similar type of play that you can,
which
you
we
can
have a great sample size.
We have a great sample size of, and Karl-Anthony Towns leads the league in effective field goal percentage with under 4 seconds left on the shot clock. Yet he's only taken 74 such shots, whereas Jimmy Butler has taken 133 this season. Karl-Anthony Towns has also played 130% of the games and minutes of Jimmy Butler, so that's an issue. Karl-Anthony Towns' effective field goal percentage is 61.5%, under 4 seconds left in the shot clock. Jimmy Butler's is 38.8. That's an issue. That also players getting more of those shots than him are Jeff Teague, 50%, Andrew Wiggins, 38%. Jamal Crawford even has taken 37 more such shots.
I feel like
Towns.
Crawford's is partially who's on the court at what time.
Sure, that is true, but he's also the worst on the team by a lot.
That doesn't surprise me.
33.8% effective field goal percentage is a nightmare. And so what this shows me very clearly is, okay, there's not very much time left on the shot clock. I have the ball. It's isolation time. They do not seek out Karl-Anthony Towns late in the shot clock at all, or late in games.
And they do seek out, for better or for worse, statistically for worse, they seek out Jamal. If it's an end of shot clock situation and they're panicking and Tyus has the ball, he 100% of the time, not 100% on it, but most of the time he'll throw it to Jamal as sort of a bailout. Well, he's made crazy shots all his career. I think that's part of it.
Crawford craves it too.
Yeah, absolutely.
You also you'll remember at large that Crawford is not very good at it, but you remember distinctly the sweet shots. And I think if you're on the court in that moment, you go, it's going to happen, right? And just
that's why, I mean, I'm going to start writing something about usage in the playoffs and how Derrick Rose and Jamal Crawford are, I think, the top two. They were after game one. I think they are after game two. I think part of that is, like, after game two, Derrick Rose came out really quickly because he struggled. Jamal Crawford stayed out despite having similarly terrible numbers. And throughout the regular season, Jamal Crawford would stay in games or whether or not he'd play well. And anytime he'd be asked about that, Tom Thibodeau would say, essentially, this what we have been saying about him since the Wolves signed him is, sometimes he gets really hot, and that's the entire reason that he's out there. And I think that's a big reason why he has a bigger sample size than just about anybody else on the team in end of quarter situations, because he might get hot. I'm not saying he's right. In fact, I don't agree.
No, I know you don't.
But
that's just wearing on me personally. Jamal was worth it because he won his 4 games this year.
Totally.
I don't subscribe to that at all.
Like, in those 4 games, how many defensive breakdowns were there on the other side? Like, even in games 1 and 2, I just remember there's so many plays where, and he's really good about visually, be active hands or whatever when he's on the ball, but the second they set a screen and there's some commotion, his guy is always free, and he kind of just lets them go, and it's incredibly
worst
frustrating.
Defensive rating of any player in the playoffs who averaged more than 15 minutes per game during the regular season.
There's the number.
I mean,
yep.
I don't know. It's a full season. Like, what do you...
And this is not a surprise if you've been looking at the advanced numbers for the entire year.
It hasn't been a surprise if you turned on a game. You're like,
ever.
Skinny 11, not very good at defense.
Yep.
His guy scores all the time.
Skinny 11.
Like, wow. It's killer. It's killer to the team. I don't know.
I'm loving these new words we're making up today.
So I have a question about a quote that you guys may or may not have read because you guys have been traveling. Zach Lowe's pod with
Hearing? Or Dan Devine.
Yeah. The quote that he had about the Towns.
About how there's internal disputes or whatever?
The exact quote, which I got from an article on 1500 ESPN, is that there's clearly some internal disagreement in Minnesota, and that's not just reading public comments, that's a real thing. Do we think that means anything?
Well, yeah, that happened. They said that on Tuesday at practice. They said, yeah, we should get Towns the ball. No, we shouldn't get Towns the ball. The point guard and the coach disagree on that openly.
Which, the weird thing about that is that Wiggins and Towns did not choose Tibbs, but Tibbs chose Teague.
And vice versa by him signing here.
And Teague went to his agent and said, I want to go play there, right? Mm-hmm. That's the most befuddling thing. You have a player that essentially is under contract for 2 more years. $19 million is nothing to sneeze at. And that's his hand-picked dude. And I'm going to throw this grenade in there, but like Ricky Rubio, doing pretty well with Utah. You know what I mean? I think
Teague's been good though.
Yeah, I like him as a player. It's just interesting that philosophically.
I was going to say it's not even like talking about his fit and his role and his whatever. It's the fact that he's the one making the public comments about it. Because like I know you guys were at practice, but Jace Frederick has put some of Teague's quotes from practice today up, and he talked about it again.
Great. I think part of it, and I could be wrong, but I think getting into Teague's comments and how they differ from Tibbs doesn't necessarily suggests that Teague is unhappy or disgruntled or will go against what Tom Thibodeau says when he's planning the game plan, as Kat said 10,000 times in Houston. I think it means that Jeff Teague is just an honest dude, and I don't think that means that he's going to.
I think he half disagrees. I don't
think he'll stray away from the game plan because of what he said publicly, and I don't think it'll ever be a problem internally.
I think you're completely right. I think the question is, how does that get resolved? Does anyone when Tom Thibodeau has all the power, right? Does anyone get a say? Isn't that a dictatorship?
Because it can't be just Teague thinking this.
No,
that's the thing. Is this cannot be just Jeff Teague.
You know what was interesting after Game 2? So before Game 2 was when all that stuff happened. After Game 2, Tom Thibodeau said, "I think we tried to force feed Kat the ball too much." Which I don't know if it was a response to all the media hype that came around Kat not getting the ball or whatever, or if it was just Tom Thibodeau's opinion, which is more likely what it was. But I don't know. That really intrigued me.
Just to throw this out there, Tibbs, when Boston won, was the defensive coordinator, right? Yeah. Meaning that he was kind of the mastermind and probably most decisions came through him. Does he need an offensive coordinator?
I've said that before.
Great example is Houston. This season, they're playing right now. Jeff Bzdelik is their defensive coordinator, and Mike D'Antoni has I don't want to say hands off. Actually, that's not fair. But
D'Antoni credits him. I think it was before Game 1 when they were talking about how good their defense was. He's like, credit Jeff for the defense. Mm-hmm. He's not trying to take any credit for it.
Yeah, no, I mean, the thing is, what we say a lot with Tibbs is, can you be the coach and can you be the president of basketball operations, the GM? The question we need to be asking is, can you be the president of basketball operations, the head coach, the offensive coordinator, and the defensive coordinator? And 165 games into the era, there's a lot of evidence that no, you can't.
He is the kind of guy, he not only took that sabbatical, saw how the old organizations were run, but knows very specifically not just the head coach in the league, but the assistants.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I think if you're Tibbs and you need people to buy in, talking season ticket holders, people watching on TV, just his players specifically. Mm-hmm. He also should be able to get someone from the league who he needs to buy into his system.
See if Steve Clifford gets hired as
He's
head coach.
Interviewing with Phoenix. There's mutual interest per Chris Mannix.
I just think if you're Tibbs and you're that intimately familiar with the league, you should be able to find your guy in a situation that he would come over.
I think the question becomes: is he okay with giving? I think Tibbs wants all four of those roles.
I agree.
I know,
and I think, but it comes with. It needs to be said, for whatever it's worth, Tibbs is very, and it might just be because he's talking to the media, but I think it seems genuine. Anytime you ask about another coach on another team, whether it's a head coach or an assistant coach, however he knows them, he's always very complimentary. I think he respects the coaching tree of the NBA, but at the same time, I think he. I don't want to make this sound bad or anything. I think he respects or trusts his own opinion enough that he doesn't necessarily want somebody else handling a key job, Dane, I totally agree with you. I think he, whenever you talk about Steve Clifford or when you talk about Dave Yeager or whoever else have you, he's very complimentary about the coach and the system that they integrate. He was very complimentary of Mike D'Antoni and the Rockets in Houston, and he always talks about how much he loves the offense that they run. But the idea of somebody else coming and implementing kind of their own system just doesn't seem like a Tibbs thing necessarily.
It could be someone who has Tibbs' philosophy, just executes it better. Perhaps maybe he just defines roles better. He speaks to the players better. It maybe is just a little more advanced system, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. One thing that...
Taj high-fived Tibbs during a practice in Houston. That was cool. A big moment. For whatever that's worth.
Yeah, that was an interesting.
It was a big moment
thing. Yeah, I was like,
I saw the picture Shabazz got of Tibbs with a giant grin on his face that went no one deleted footage. No one's ever seen Tibbs with this big of a smile before ever.
Yeah, right. Yeah, no, and I don't know. Yeah, I would think that could be a requirement to bring someone in that is able to articulate concepts, is the way I would put it. Is able to articulate defensive or offensive concepts. Because, obviously we know that hasn't worked on the defensive end and in ways on the offensive end, too.
How good could this team be? I mean, we do have to come back to the fact that the Wolves were a top 5 offense throughout the year statistically. How much better can this offense be with some more free-flowing, just generally more free basketball, more efficient basketball. Because they, like we've talked about, they play a lot of isolation, and I think, Dane, you talked about at one point how they like to try to get as many wide open layups as they can, and if they can't, they got guys that can hit these late end of shot clock shots, some better than others, mind you. But how much better can this team be offensively with like an offensive coordinator if Tibbs is going to focus more on defense? And if that happens, how much better can they get on defensively if it's one less thing for Tibbs to worry about?
I mean, I would say that kind of what my have written and said during the year about the offense is I think the offense was fool's gold to some extent this year. I don't think they were the fourth best offense in the NBA. Like, just watching teams play.
Agree.
Which is what everyone said all year, because they've never looked like it.
And so I guess what I mean by that and the way that can like physically manifest itself is in the playoffs. And those weaknesses can be exposed. And I would have been much more of a believer in the offense if the offense had a really good playoffs and kind of maintained that level of play. But I think the style in which they play offense, even though the numbers are very good, I think can get a little bit exposed in the playoffs. So to answer your question, I think if they brought in a great offensive coordinator, I don't think they would get up above fourth, up to like second or anything. But I think it would be a style that would have a higher likelihood of being effective in the postseason than what this is.
I don't think the playoffs, this series is necessarily, I think it's partially representative of their offensive shortcomings, but Jimmy Butler is not himself either, and a healthy Jimmy Butler probably a team with a healthy Jimmy Butler doesn't score just 82 points.
How healthy do you think Taj is?
I don't think he's
Not
healthy
very.
either.
Like, because that's the conversation that we also haven't had. Is like Taj isn't 100%, Jimmy isn't 100%. Those are two of your five starters, and probably two of your better players on the entire season
but then
overall.
Going way back to what we talked about at the beginning, when your most efficient scorer, Karl-Anthony Towns, is just totally taken out of his element, that's an offensive killer.
I also think, going back to the offensive coordinator articulating these things better, I think, does it bring you into a true top five offense? Maybe. I think more importantly, you just have happier players. And the reason why they were so good is that you have three high caliber players, but you have to articulate to Wiggins, like, this is your role. If you're not doing your job, that's why your role has changed, right? Same thing with Towns. This is your role if you're not doing your job. And you have to define all those things. And I'm sure Tibbs has said them. I think the question we've had openly, and a lot of people I've heard, just either fans of the team or even reading national people, they go, is the message getting through? I have not seen evidence that we know that Rose is a Tibbs guy. We know that Butler's a Tibbs guy. We know Taj is a Tibbs guy. But we don't know. I just don't know if Towns and Wiggins will be. And to do that, I think you have to...
No high fives.
No high fives for you. Yeah,
I'm serious.
Yeah.
I think you can make the case.
Oh, you're saying, yeah.
I'm serious.
Like, yeah. That's a very fair
point. The brief amount of time that we are able to be around the team and see Tibbs hanging out, interacting with the guys after practice or shoot-arounds or whatever, he is the type of leader who, when he hangs out with some of the guys afterwards or sits down next to him, it's always the veterans. And I don't know if that necessarily means he dislikes Towns or Wiggins, but he sees them lower on the age hierarchy, if nothing else. Mm-hmm. Today at practice, he was across the court, and him and Derrick Rose were standing next to each other talking for 5-10 minutes after practice. Seen him do that with Butler a lot of the time, Tim or David, whoever it was, one of you guys brought up Taj after practice, and I've seen that. My assumption is also that Andrew and Karl are not Tibbs guys, but at the same time, whatever, the Chicago version of us 5 years ago would have said the same thing about Tibbs and Jimmy Butler. And Jimmy Butler wasn't in that inner working when he was a 22-year-old, wasn't in the rotation. Yep. I think Tibbs is the type of person who gravitates towards NBA adults.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, and I think that's a fair point. Two questions for you. How much of what we're saying all now, I think factually it's all there, but just the tone in which we're saying it is reflective of how they performed in Game 2, do you think? And how much do you think this stuff changes with Tibbs and his culture in year 3? Because it was a bad first year. This is the first year they've actually been competitive.
You're 100% sure if they get swept that he's the coach next year?
Yeah, I think you can't get out of that contract. But I don't...
Well, okay, so we were talking to... I'm not going to say who the person was because we probably shouldn't say. Well, no, I think we can say what this person said, though.
Yeah.
The Wolves have become a much more valuable team just in terms of overall value, selling value. So maybe with that in mind, maybe firing Tibbs isn't as ridiculously expensive to Glenn Taylor as it would have been 2-3 years ago.
And that's kind of the thing that the conversations that might start to happen with a quote like the Zach Lowe quote that I brought up, right? Because if that's like, that's a quote that he heard from somebody in the organization.
I took that a little out of... I changed the context of that to Teague rather than you meant the organization of like the front office and maybe
because it's one of those things. It's like if Kat's going to talk to Glenn Taylor about this, like that's nothing like that has been reported. So that would be complete total supposition.
Yeah,
that's one of those things that's like when Jimmy Butler's the face now, Karl-Anthony Towns should be the face of this franchise going forward. And as soon as he signs a max extension this offseason, which under every circumstance I expect he will, that makes that very interesting because that's like, I think you care more about Towns' future with the franchise than you do about Tibbs's. And if Towns is starting to like,
hell yeah,
yeah, exactly. And so if Towns is starting to have these thoughts and these conversations and be frustrated with how his role is constructed in the Tom Thibodeau team, that makes this conversation a lot more interesting than it was about a month ago.
So I will say this. I think we should think about it as 2 more years left on his deal. I know it's 3 technically, but you can always get out of that last year. Like, you can eat that money, and that's not uncommon.
I think Tim's point is, how do we know that? You say that like that's sure. Like, you can get out of $8 million, but how do we know that $8 million is cool to get out of and 24 isn't?
That's fair. I'm talking broadly and more commonly, like just we see across sports that people are willing to eat the final year of players and
just generally speaking.
Yeah,
don't get me wrong. I don't think that this is a likelihood.
Right.
I just think it's a conversation that is. I mean, it's up for debate.
I'll go this direction. I'd want to see 1 more year because I'd want to see, do they secure a winnable playoff series next season?
And see again, and that's just not how. Those aren't like the. That's not how I see progression in this.
Yeah.
My question is what does 5 years from now look like? Or 4 years, if you want to say, like, once the Warriors are down. Like, I don't know if just going up that ladder that you're kind of suggesting of securing a spot, competing the next year in that.
How does Glenn Taylor look at it, though? Because he's got to look at it from a PR standpoint, too. And firing the coach that gets you to the playoffs after 14 years, I mean, that might be okay because, as we've talked about, not all fans are big on Tom Thibodeau. But on the other hand, he did get him there. I think that might mean something.
Does that make sense what I was saying, though?
I think the issue, you're saying you're taking more of a long view, and I'm looking step by step.
Yeah, and you're looking at, okay, there's 4 steps to get to that long view. We got to check boxes on the way there. I guess I'm less concerned about hitting the certain platforms on the way there than just putting together a product right now that can get there.
So let me go this direction. I think I'm picking up on what you're saying, but I said on last week's podcast, I think, or last time I was on, this team needs to hit its ceiling as quick as possible. Meaning, if that ceiling's in the championship range, let's go, baby. And if it's not, if you're the Doc Rivers Clippers, let's see that right away because then that's when you make the change. That's in my mind. I still think they're on.
I agree with
I think there's another stage of ascent, and that's why. So I'm not suggesting that they'll go immediately from winnable playoff series to Western Conference champion to champion. Mm-hmm. I'm saying if they're in a winnable playoff series, I think I get a clear view of what that ceiling is.
And let's say you're Glenn Taylor, and let's say that the ceiling ends up being the Doc Rivers Clippers or the Joe Johnson Hawks, whatever you want to call it. Is that, again, if you're Glenn Taylor, is that okay for now, considering the horrible past they've had? As in, let's say this team's ceiling is the Western Conference Finals once in 3 years or something. They're a first, second round team for 5-6 years. If you're Glenn Taylor, are you okay with that? I can see a scenario where you are because I think some teams are looking at the Warriors right now and now the Rockets to maybe a somewhat similar degree and thinking like, well, what route is realistic in catching those teams? And if that means that you're competing and getting into the playoffs and making it out of the first round and maybe competing with maybe getting to a conference finals once, I can see a scenario where Glenn Taylor sees that as passable or okay for now.
The other thing that I think is interesting is if you look around the league at the coach president of basketball operations duopolies, they are dying.
Oh yeah,
Like the Mike Budenholzer is gone. Doc Rivers is gone. Stan Van Gundy, it was reported this week, is having conversations with Pistons management.
it sounds like that's probably gone.
his role.
Yeah.
So
TMZ
that's
caught
probably done.
A picture of him with his head in a guillotine, and it was about to. He's going to get fired.
So that because it's either that or he's just gonna go back to being coach. You would assume.
Okay, yeah.
He's probably fired, but that was like everybody kind of thought Doc Rivers was gonna have that, and instead he just stepped back to being coach this year. Hired Lawrence Frank, and they did what they did this year. That, unless I'm misremembering, would leave Tibbs as the only one with anything close
Greg
to that
Popovich.
kind of
Pop's
power.
the only
and
one.
Pop. And like it has shown overall that it doesn't really work that well as a model. So then it's like if Glenn wants to have that conversation with Tibbs and Layden, is Tibbs willing to cede that power, or will he just say, if you want me to lose it, fire me?
So I think
And I feel like I know which one Tibbs would say.
No, I think that's a valid
But-
point. I think that's a conversation for after next year. I guess that's what I'm getting at. Is I want a little more sample size of playoff Wolves.
Right, and
Before me-
I hear that. I'm not saying that's dumb at all. I'm just saying it's kind of go time.
Yep.
Andrew Wiggins
And-
is 22. Andrew Wiggins is 23. Towns is 22. Is there a possibility in that goal that you're saying, Tom, that we have wasted another year?
And another point I want to put on you, Tom, is with pushing the discussion back to 2019. If this is proved an unsustainable relationship, that means firing Tom Thibodeau as Jimmy Butler becomes an unrestricted free agent.
And that's a really good point.
There's no way around if that's the timeline.
Can we, to the extent that you can we try to view Butler in a vacuum? Like, at some point, no matter what, I understand what you're getting at that relationship and the Bulls mentality and all this that Tibbs has brought over. At some point, no matter what, you've given up Lauri Markkanen and Zach LaVine for Jimmy Butler.
Yes.
Like, I think that if Steve Clifford is the coach then, or whoever's the GM, they're going to be like, yeah, we kind of have to hold on to this asset now, whether it's 3 or 5 years. I mean,
That's kind of what Tibbs had to do with Wiggins to a certain degree, right?
Yeah, and I think that's a very valid point, and I think Butler's a weird. All of a sudden, that trade that everyone was convinced was a ripoff, and vengeful Tibbs went and screwed the Bulls, right? I don't know. I think that's still up in the air. I like Butler as a player. I like the mentality he brought. I think it only works, to Naylor's point, if you get Tibbs' full tenure at least 4 years, which means 2 more after this.
Yeah, let him run its course a little more. See, yeah, that's fair. I hear that, and I'm not calling for Tibbs to be fired right now. I think it's a conversation or something we're thinking about as us. And I mean, in our jobs, that's our job, is to suppose and to speculate and
Right.
and hopefully,
It's a
respectful ways.
and it's a conversation that's getting had in other channels. So we have a place to have it that people have to listen to. Haha.
I do think it's interesting you bring up the trade, and that triggered the Timberwolves rocketing their window up sooner.
Good playoff pun.
That was think about that. They moved their window up probably too far. Maybe I don't know. It really came as like, okay, we're competing now, and the cost of that was obviously some of those was the market and the Dunn and the LaVine they gave up, but it also made it so it's like, okay, we have to put our assets in play now to compete right away, and makes this offseason more pertinent than what I was arguing before, is having the 2 draft picks. Maybe having the 2 draft picks isn't as big of a deal if you hadn't rocketed up the window now. Does that make sense at all? Like they could have been like, I would have been more down for them to have made the playoffs and been the 8th seed and been swept if they hadn't moved the window up.
And I think in some ways Tibbs is saying, I know what I'm doing. Just we can't, and I think this part I will argue with people on. I think Tibbs' mentality probably was right in one small area in that the Wolves could not afford to do just a slow kind of build. Like, it's just, you've already lost faith in every slow rebuild that took place since.
As in keeping Levine or something like that.
As in keeping Levine
Yeah.
and hoping Markkanen works out and seeing how all those pieces work and this and that. Like, at a certain point, going back to Tibbs being a cup of coffee defibrillator, he's the defibrillator. Right then he went bzzz and jolted some energy into him and said, it's going to work. My philosophy works. What I had in Chicago was going fine. It just, Rose got injured, all this, right? In some capacity, he's going, I had a good thing going in Chicago. I'm bringing it here to Minnesota, right? The thing is, it ties everything to Tibbs. Like, he wears everything, and in some ways, for the organization, if Tibbs can get him into the playoffs and they feel like he needs someone else to go to the next level, it's kind of convenient. You just throw him overboard. Go, that's all Tibbs stuff, man. The only thing that you're stuck with is you got to figure out what to do with Jimmy Butler.
Right.
And that's why I think Tibbs is here for 4 years no matter what. I think the question is, does he play, or is he there the 5th year of his contract? Because after the 4th year, he may say, hey, you got to extend me at least a year. I'm not going to just work on 1 year contract, right? I mean, so what I'm saying is I think Tibbs is here to stay, and I think for better or for worse, that's the direction.
How much would winning one of these next 2 games help him, if any?
Big, I think. You win in front of your home fans? I mean, if you won game 1, that'd been huge. That would have been,
No, I mean, there's like certainly some value. I just question how much in like the big picture. I'm cheering for that to happen. I want the Wolves to win. I want them to win both the home games. I think that's great. I think there's a 0% chance that they win this series. So I don't know. It's like,
we had talked in the ride over here, maybe at practice, about the odds of them getting back to Houston. And, I mean, even that number is pretty small. But that goes back to, if Butler's hurt, that's huge. If Taj is hurt, that's huge. But even with them healthy, the Rockets have shown they're just equipped to destroy this team. It's just how they're built. Mm-hmm. The Wolves aren't a good defensive team. The Rockets make a crap ton of threes. Offensively, the Wolves have been efficient, but they don't shoot a bunch of threes. 3's greater than 2. Like, I think it's
the
really
John
that
Krasinski
simple.
tweet that has happened every matchup the Wolves and Rockets had in the regular season, where they got the doors blown off them every time.
Yeah, when they do the side by side, Rockets scored this many on 3s, the Wolves scored this many. There's your difference. Like, it can really be that simple. And when these 2 teams face off, it's really hard for them to win. But that goes back to, like, again, because I don't know the answer to this. How important would a win be to what we started talking about at the beginning, to getting to the playoffs at all, and I guess bigger picture, which it's probably a little premature since the Wolves are just getting back to Minnesota, but to Tibbs' future and his reputation.
I mean, I think you got to do something that feels like you competed in the series.
Something that justifies getting there.
Yeah.
Other than like the PR, you know.
And I think I clearly have a different threshold for that. But
yeah, sure. That's fine.
I don't know. I do think it's actually maybe likely that in this game 3 or 4 we see the Wolves win, and maybe the Rockets. I think there's a chance that the Rockets kind of come up flat one of the games. Yeah. Like
they did in game 1, right? And this one's
they missed a lot of open shots.
My prediction for the series was Rockets in 5, because I think the Wolves win one of the 2 games at home.
Yeah,
that happens because they were one of the best home teams in the league the entire year.
Sure.
But if the Wolves, say the Rockets come out flat tomorrow, and the Wolves win that game, and they get a little bit of momentum, and they win game 2, or get the game 2 at home, so game 4, and it's 2-2, and they go back to Houston, and it ends up really being a battle, a 6 or 7 game battle. Then all the shit I started this podcast with is probably wrong, because I think then you have some discernible value in what these playoffs were, and then that I assume will be more valuable than what the first round pick was. The reason I was so adamant on that is because I don't think that that's going to happen.
Yeah.
Just like you said.
And I agree with you.
Yeah.
Like, even having been on the more positive end of all of this, I have very low expectations for this series, especially after the first 2 games.
Right. I think there's, like we've said, I think that there's more value in just getting there, getting that crap out of the way. The 14-year thing is done. Now they can just focus on being good and not whatever else comes with it. But
that's what I don't get. I don't get what the whatever else that comes with it is. It's like it's nice to have
I think it's even more doubt in the team. I really
I think
the
just
fans, right?
I think the players do too, though. I think the players like, come on, this has been 2 years.
Yeah, I think
Gorgie's the only one on the team who's been there for 5. I mean, it's like I think to some extent they're like it doesn't matter.
So let me go this direction.
They don't take blame.
But even sorry, go ahead. Tom.
Wiggins and Towns need to buy into Tips for this to work. I think. I mean, hands down.
Sure.
I think it would hurt the chances they do, because in some ways.
But that has nothing to do with the 14 years, the 10 years before they got onto the team.
No. I think it has to do with a terrible year last year.
That's another layer, though. The players making the playoffs versus missing the playoffs, I think, is important to the players and the morale of the players. If they miss it and they're sitting at home, like.
I agree with that.
Denver made it.
I agree with that, but that's not what you said. That's not what you said. You said the 14
right,
years.
and you asked what's everything else that comes with it, and that's more short term, and the players and the morale of the players. I think all of that is really, really important.
Right.
Obviously, a draft pick helps with flexibility, and that's huge. But my side of it is, for the sake of just the player sanity and the fan sanity, making the playoffs is a big deal.
And that's like, all you got to do is look at Denver.
Sure.
All you got to do is look at the comments out of Denver, the comments by the Denver players, the comments by Mike Malone after that game and the weeks following and exit interviews. That sucks a lot for them, and it might have implications for their franchise, for Malone's job, for everything.
And I think it would have been
that.
worse for the Wolves because Denver had to do everything perfectly for the last 2 weeks or so, or 2.5 weeks.
Yeah.
Minnesota, if they would have missed the playoffs, it would have been just a total collapse from where they were in February or March, early March. So I don't know.
They're not apples to oranges, though, right? Like, because they've done the same thing for two straight years.
Well, that's even worse.
Yeah, I think that's worse than where the Wolves would have been.
No,
that's why I don't think
totally
it would have been as I don't think they would have been as up in arms as Denver is right now, because
98% to make the playoffs after the All-Star break, according to 538.
It's big
I know
picture
it's just numbers.
worse.
The Wolves?
Yeah, 98% after the All-Star break.
It's big picture worse for the Nuggets.
Elaborate on that.
By 538's playoff odds.
Yeah.
At the end of the All-Star break, they had a 98% chance to make the playoffs. It came down to the last night of the series, and they actually dropped below 50%. That was a catastrophic collapse.
Absolutely. Yeah, but also Jimmy Butler got hurt in the first game after the All-Star break.
You're right. And also the other teams in the West are all insane.
Yeah.
Oh, man. Yeah, so
all
many
of them.
streaks.
But,
I mean, yeah. It's bigger picture. It's worse for Denver. I think within the context of just this one season, it would have been much, much worse for.
And it's probably a conversation that's too long to have right now.
Yeah,
honestly.
Bonus 15 minutes.
Because that's the thing is starting that conversation is another podcast worth of material.
I think this is an off season. Let's.
Yeah.
No,
let's talk about free agent targets. I want to talk about free agent targets. Just kidding.
It's a good off-season. It's a good off-season discussion. I'm saying something could change in the next 2 games.
Okay, so
we don't know how it ends.
Let's talk about the next 2 games.
I'm excited for it to change.
All of this aside, the Wolves are in the playoffs, and we get to talk about the playoffs for us personally, or at least I don't want to speak for you guys, but for me personally, it's fun to do.
There's a home playoff game at Target Center for the first time in 14 years. That's cool.
Will John Krasinski be there?
That's fun.
Not snowed into freaking wherever he was.
He's not going to Eau Claire to watch this game. That was a really good story that he wrote.
Also, I'm so mad at you guys for missing 18 inches of snow, by the way.
We were there on Saturday.
We
almost missed we should have talked about that, but we almost missed our flight due to weather, due to a Canadian guy. It was a mess.
I drove to do the Minnesota soccer pod on Sunday, and it was not a good idea.
Thank you.
You're welcome. It was not a good. That was not a good idea for any of us.
If we were trying to pod on Saturday last week, I would have said nope. Sorry.
Skype is great.
Anyway, real quick before we wrap up, games 3 and 4. Let's talk about how we feel going into it. What are the odds that they win one of these next 2 games?
I think
in your eyes,
lower than I thought they were at the start of the series, but I think they still do win one of the 2.
Okay.
I think they win game 3.
Bet you a beer on that.
Done.
I bought him a beer for the Jazz making the playoffs.
Oh, yeah, you did. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Trash.
We need a bet board.
Game 3 they win. I think 4 is going to be the realist. I think it's going to look kind of like the
Wild Series.
The Wild Series are game 1 and 2 of in Houston.
I thought we were done with hockey. Fight puck.
Naylor brought it up.
David?
I did bring it up because I watched most of that series.
Dane, how do you feel?
Well, me, Tim, and Ricardo were talking at practice today, and Ricardo said it's like a 15 to 20% chance that the Wolves win either of those games. I think that's a bit low because I think they're home games. So, you got to probably give them more than 10% in each game individually and then take the sum. So I would say I think it's well over a 25% chance that they win one. I'm not expecting it, and that's why I'm betting David Appier on.
Yep.
But I do think I more so agree with you than I agree with Ricardo, who's all but saying it's over. In 4, yeah, I don't know. I mean,
Ricardo.
I think we also got to remember that the Rockets aren't at full strength right now, too.
Yep.
Ryan Anderson hasn't played. Bam Mute, we kind of mentioned that some of the P.J. Tuckers and Joe Johnson, the switches and the guys that they've had. Bam Mute is almost just as valuable for them.
Totally.
And
Ryan Anderson destroyed the Wolves in the regular season.
Yeah. So the numbers on that are like a scary
Are
fake
unbelievable. And he's expected to be back tomorrow.
He
for Game
almost,
3.
I think it sounded like he almost played game 2, so I'd be somewhat surprised if he didn't play game 3.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's going to be hard, I think, and I'm going to wrote about it and write about it a little bit more before the game starts tomorrow. It's just, I really think it's brilliant what the Rockets are doing defensively against the Wolves. It's so good. And it's so outside of the box. They are baiting them into saying, putting up the facade of, oh, Towns is guarded by Eric Gordon. Come on, give it to him.
Yep.
See what happens. And then the Wolves get obsessed with doing that.
Yep.
And it freaks Towns out, and he shoots 5 of 18. Like, Towns is, what I say before, crap in the bed in this series some, but he is pretty brilliant what they're doing.
The Heat did this a little bit, right? With Justice Winslow?
It's just having multiple guys who aren't bigs who can kind of hold their own for Towns for a minute, and then bringing a hard double.
And then it's, can the Wolves figure out a solution before it's too late?
Or can Towns just figure out how to work around it?
Exactly.
There's a chance that Towns is a really, really good offensive player. He could adjust, but I agree. What they're doing defensively on him has totally stifled him.
He could adjust. I wonder if...
What are you saying, Dane?
Shooters would be key. Having Towns get a couple touches in there early and a skip that Wiggins hits 2 threes right away, or Towns catches so quickly that he scores a couple buckets right away in the beginning. That could change. That's how you punch that,
because the offense has to work for them to win a game.
Yeah,
the offense has got to be better.
And the reason why I think I agree with Ricardo's 15 to 20 number is I don't think the offense can go if A, Towns isn't going to be able to figure out this defense, this Rockets defense, and B, if Jimmy Butler isn't Jimmy Butler. Mm-hmm. If Jimmy Butler isn't himself, they don't.
7 to 10% seem pretty low for tomorrow, though.
15 to 20.
Yeah, but I mean, it's two games.
That's for 2 games.
So it's 7 to 10 twice. Is how you get 15 to 20%.
I would say it's a 15 to 20% chance per game. I mean,
that's different though. But that's different.
Don't do math with me right now.
No, but it is though. That's what I'm arguing.
I'll put it this way. If they lose game 3, I think it's still a 15 to 20% chance. I think it's a 15 to 20% chance they win game 3. If they win game 3, I think the odds of them winning game 4 are much lower because Houston would come out strong. Mm-hmm. So game to game, I think it's 15 to 20 depending on the result. Is that a better explanation?
Yeah. No, yeah, that's just, I think that's what I was, because I just know from like regular season games, it's like, it's hard to find a team that's that low. The percentage, talk about 538 or betting lines or anything.
But if
like
there
that.
is a team, it's Houston. I think.
Sure.
But then again, they beat the Warriors without, never mind.
Yeah.
What I was saying was I think it comes down to how healthy Jimmy Butler is because, I mean, for all we've said about the problems that they may or may not have offensively, it's just the eyesore that it can be sometimes. It's been good a lot of times. They've been able to win some closer games because Butler's hero balled them out. And if they don't have that option, I don't see a route to beating a team as good as Houston. Mm-hmm. That's what it comes down to.
Other than Jamal scoring 40.
If Jamal gets hot. Which
if Jamal scores 40,
talk about
that means
odds.
Jamal needs to play 30 minutes, which means somebody on Houston will also score 40.
At least one somebody. At least one.
If it's James Harden, it's more like 70.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you want to wrap it up, Tommy? Or do you want me to wrap it up, rather?
Go ahead. Wrap it up.
Okay.
Please.
Go watch, if you have League Pass or the ability to watch replays of games that aren't this series and want more basketball, watch Sixers Heat from last night, which was awesome.
Good.
And watch anything from Jazz Thunder, which I think is going to be a very fun series to watch after the series is over.
Miami Heat, great Gorgie Jang trade partner.
Yeah.
That's a preview for some off-season content right there.
We talked about that at an establishment in Houston, if I recall, and I think I know the player that you're thinking of. Am I? Anyway, we'll talk
Kelly
about it. Yeah, Kelly. Yeah.
Damn it.
Wayne Ellington.
Bomb.
So for David Naylor at Prof Cedar, Tom Schreier at T Schreier3, Dane Moore at Dane Moore NBA. I'm Tim Faklis at TIM FAKLIS. This has been another Wolves Wired, and we'll see you next time.